Hey friends, coming up on today's show, I got to sit down with the godfather of Double IPA, Mr. Vinnie Cilurzo, where we discuss his history as a homebrewer, the incredible journey of Russian River Brewing Company, and he even shares his exact 5-gallon recipe so that we can brew the perfect clone of Pliny the Elder. So stay tuned. Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions and discuss all things related to craft beer. And if you, my friend, have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you could go to Homebrew Happy Hour and click on that submit a question link at the top of the page. Even better, call it in to 325-305-6107. Leave your message after the beep. You know I love hearing your voice. It validates me, and it makes my wife realize that actual people listen to this. Either way, I am your host, Joshua Stubing. I am so excited for this week's episode. He doesn't need an introduction, but I wrote stuff down for you anyways, Vinny. So let me go ahead and read what I wrote down. Vinnie Cilurzo is the pioneer of the first commercial double IPA in the mid-90s, and he set the global gold standard for the style with Pliny the Elder, and has spent decades at the intersection of technical precision and creative legend. As the co-founder and brewmaster of Russian River Brewing Company, he's helped shape the landscape of American IPAs and wild ales alike. We are incredibly honored to sit down with him. Vinnie Cilurzo, my friend Vinny, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite and looking forward to our conversation.
Dude, I'm so excited to have you on. When I first reached out to y'all, which by the way, thank you for your team for getting back to me. You know how hard it is to get emails back at all? It could be quite the journey. But the original plan I had told you, I don't know if you even remember, it was a while back. I was like, we're going to probably fly out there to California, visit some vendors. Yeah, here we are remote. I'm in Texas. You're in Santa Rosa. I'm assuming you're in the Santa Rosa location.
Yeah, I'm in Windsor, actually, but that's all good. Either way.
Yeah. And but I am so happy that we're able to sit down. The kit we're doing this month, arguably the most complex build of any of the commercial clones we're going to be doing for this year. And I've had way more people sign up spontaneously than ever for any other kit, because they're looking at it and they're going, oh my God, for $60. And they look at just the hop schedule and they're like, yeah, I'm signing up.
We can talk about why I have so many varieties in there when we get to that portion of the show. There is a method to the madness there.
Dude, I believe you. And the awards speak for themselves, and the history of the beer speaks for itself. There's no lack of content about you. If someone's listening to the show and they're like, I've never heard of this guy, go to YouTube. There's literally like many documentaries made after you. So I'm just happy to have you sit here and eventually, like you talked about, just totally criticize and scrutinize the recipe that we have. I live for it. That's the dream. If you don't mind, I'll take less than 2 minutes. I have some small talk to get through for regular listeners, just some housekeeping stuff that we do. And people like these interviews because normally the small talk, I digress. I go down rabbit holes. 20 minutes later, we're talking content. But right now, I'm ending this digression. I'm getting to the small talk. My friends, if you go to patreon.com/homebrew happy hour, you'll see that Pliny the Elder clone there. We're calling it West Coast Legend. You can get it by joining a recipe receiving tier. Again, patreon.com/homebrew happy hour. Join a recipe receiving tier like dozens of people, new members have. I'm starting to ship these out of my home now, all the kits, and I'm incorporating child labor, Vinny, into this. My kids are bagging hops. I'm sorry. I don't know if that's actually indicting myself, so incriminating myself. But either way, these kits, friends, are available. You can do 5, 10, or 15-gallon varieties at patreon.com/homebrew happy hour, which means my pop and I are going to be brewing this live at youtube.com/homebrew happy hour on Friday, March 27th at 10 a.m. Central. Come join the fun. Brew Day Live, March 27th at 10 a.m. Central, youtube.com/homebrew happy hour. Stop that timer. Boom. That was quick. That's the title of my memoir from my honeymoon. That was quick. Anyway, this episode is brought to you by brewersfriend.com. Brewing beer at home isn't just about ingredients, it is about precision. And that's where brewersfriend.com comes in. Whether you're dialing in your first recipe or perfecting your 100th, Brewer's Friend gives you the tools to brew with confidence. Their recipe builder, mash calculators, and water profile database helps take the guesswork out of the process so you can focus on what matters, making great beer. Brewer's Friend isn't just software, it's a community of passionate homebrewers sharing recipes, tips, and feedback. It's like having a homebrew club right in your pocket. Head over to brewersfriend.com today and take your homebrewing to the next level. Use promo code Happy Hour and get 25% off your premium membership. That's brewersfriend.com, because brewing better starts with better tools. Vinny, getting us on topic, people, one thing that I do love about consuming media, and I've read a bunch of interviews from you, even before trying to do my homework for this. You've been featured in all the popular magazines, Craft Beer Channel, international, this or that. I always love getting something new out of it. Like, you could tell your story a million times, and there's always something new to get out of it. And one thing I don't think you've maybe elaborated a ton on, or I'm just dense and didn't catch it, is your beginnings with your love of craft beer. Like that documentary on your website does kind of cover it, but like you have a long time infatuation with craft beer, and not just craft beer, making craft beer, doing it yourself. What got you into that? How did that whole passion start?
Yeah, so like so many, craft brewers, and for me, my first professional brewery was back in the mid '90s, 1994. So back then, craft beer, the term didn't even exist. It was called microbrewed beer or microbrewing. But before that, I was a home brewer. So like so many microbrewers or craft brewers, I was a home brewer. My hobby got out of control, and it led me to start a little brewery in Southern California, which after a few years I left. My partners kept going, and I moved up with Natalie to Northern California. But yeah, my home brewing was 1989. I grew up in a small town in Southern California, not so small anymore, Temecula. Temecula is a wine region, has 60 or 70 wineries now. And my parents planted the first commercial grapes in Temecula in 1968. So I was born into a wine-making, grape-growing family kind of thing. But I started homebrewing years later. But when I moved to San Diego to go to college, my couple of my roommates were really into good beer, and mostly imports, but they drank this beer called Liberty Ale from Anchor Brewing in San Francisco. So great hoppy beer, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, Boston Lager, Sam Adams Boston Lager, and then a brown ale called Pete's Wicked Ale, which no longer exists. But anyways, those were just kind of a handful of the early microbrewed beers, and we started homebrewing in our, laundry room or whatever it was. And I don't remember what my first beer we brewed. I know it was an extract kit. But Dennis, my roommate, and I were instantly hooked. And I think like 2-3 days later, we were back at the homebrew shop in San Diego, which was out in El Cajon, which is East San Diego. It was called Beer and Wine Craft. It was owned by this older couple, Owen and Audrey, and they were just the sweetest people, and they fed our, kind of our thirst and quenched our thirst for homebrewing. And eventually we found Charlie Papazian's book, which was kind of the go-to book back then, the, Complete Joy of Homebrewing. And then it was the New Complete Joy of Homebrewing as he updated it. And that was the Bible that we used.
Yeah.
Now it's, if you start brewing, How to Brew is probably the place where you go. But back then it was Charlie's book, and it was a great way to roll through brewing. And pretty quick we moved to all grain brewing, and pretty quick we started brewing hoppy beers because of our love specifically for Liberty Ale and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, which, now people look at those beers, and Liberty Ale unfortunately doesn't exist right now, but hopefully Anchor's getting back going here soon. But anyways, people will look at those beers and say, wow, those are kind of pedestrian beers. But, if you think about it at the time, those beers are really revolutionary from a hop forward standpoint. I know Sierra Pale isn't dry hopped, but just the hop load at the time was considered quite large, and Liberty Ale, all Cascade beer, with the Cascade hops coming from Siegel Ranch, who we now work with up in Washington. But that was pretty legendary and revolutionary to be doing whatever they were doing, it was a single malt, single hop, and whatever yeast Anchor had, ale yeast they had. It was just a really big hoppy beer, and it was really inspiring. And so we did start brewing IPAs pretty quickly, and that kind of carried through my whole homebrew run until I went professional, because you really couldn't buy IPA. And what IPAs were available were mostly pretty English style, so a decent amount of crystal malt and mostly English hops. And then when you think about the hops that were available in 1989, 1990, there was no Columbus, there was no Centennial yet. There was Cascade, of course. Comet was available, and I remember seeing that. And now Comet's made a comeback. Chinook. And then for bittering, it was either Chinook, Galena, or Nugget. You didn't have any of these uber over the top 20% alpha hops like we see now. And in fact, I remember Dennis and I walking into the homebrew shop, Beer and Wine Craft, and seeing these little bags of hops, little 2-ounce bags is how they were sold. And they had just a number on them, and it turns out they were some of the most early experimental hops, and there was CFJ4 and CFJ90, and we bought them and we ended up brewing with them. And I do remember liking CFJ4 a little better, but CFJ90 eventually became Centennial, and so that was in about 1990, I think. I don't know, can't remember the exact year, but it was so early on the Centennial didn't exist. And then when I eventually started my first brewery, Blind Pig, in Temecula, the basic recipe was Cascade, Chinook, and Centennial, because it had been named at this point by 94. But Columbus was still in the experimental phase, and I think I was able to get my hands on it maybe a year later, and then I incorporated Columbus into the recipe. So there was no Amarillo, Citra, Mosaic, Citra, the designer hops that we see now that make brewing IPAs so much easier because they're so impactful.
Yeah, what was it like in like you said, 89? Look, don't let the balding fool you. I'm only 40. And don't let the wrinkles either. It's been a rough night. But 89, I'm 4 years old. But at that point, what was it like the Wild West in regards to hey, this new thing's on the shelf. I have no idea what it is, but let's try it because it's new. Like,
well, we didn't know what we didn't know. We were just young homebrewers learning. The beer scene was so much different then. Like, everyone, we then found the Michael Jackson Guide to Beer, which, not the singer.
Yes, I know.
the beer writer,
yes,
and, still the greatest beer writer ever. And if you don't have some of his books, those things are amazing. And you'd read these things and you'd try say a Belgian beer like Chimay, and then you'd go to his book and you would look for it and you'd read about it and you'd read the history of it, and then you'd be like, I wonder if I could homebrew this thing. And it's like, where do I even get Belgian yeast from? And and luckily Y Yeast was around back then. They were the only commercial yeast company. White Labs didn't exist yet, and they had a pretty good selection of mix of yeast, albeit English, Belgian, American. So 1056 was the Chico yeast from Sierra, which supposedly was from Ballantine Brewery before that. But anyway, so I don't know if you call it the Wild West, but it was just this quest for knowledge, and there was no internet, of course. So you looked for books. You then find out that there's a homebrewing magazine called Zymergy, which at the time, of course, was the only one out there. There was a couple of other homebrewing books, which I have many of them in my office here still. A great beer writer who passed away many years ago, Fred Eckhart from the Pacific Northwest, wrote an early book called The Treaty of Lager Brewing that I was able to find. And there was Byron Birch, who was actually had his homebrew shop with his spouse, Nancy Vineyard here in Santa Rosa, actually, and called The Beverage People. And he had a book out, and then there were some English writers. And so he pretty much like get all these books. And then the technical stuff was coming from a guy from Texas called George Fix. And you can still find George's books. And I was lucky enough to become friends with him over the years. And his books on the homebrew level were the most technical books, along with Greg Nonan from Vermont, who eventually started a brewery there, and he's got a lager book that still is relevant. But that was kind of, we had all these different books that we were like thumbing through, and that was it. And this was in Southern California. So there was 3 breweries, and specifically San Diego. So there was 3 breweries in San Diego open. Karl Strauss was the first, and they're still going. The second was Pizza Port, and they're still going strong, multiple locations around San Diego and Orange County. And then the third was this little brew pub called Callahan's, and that's where Quaff, the San Diego Homebrew Club, would meet at, that I was a member of. And that was the only commercial craft beer, but the only one really making IPA commercially that was like the homebrew I was making, which was low crystal malt, just 2-row and crystal malt pretty much. Sometimes maybe sugar, but I don't think I even started using sugar till years later. Was Pizza Port, and their beer Swami's. They still make that IPA, and it's a different recipe now, but modernized to keep it relevant. And then there was a brewery in Sacramento that I would go to when I would go up to Davis to take homebrew classes or commercial brewing classes. And it was called the Rubicon Brewery, and they were in downtown Sacramento. And they too had just an exceptional, what would now be called a West Coast IPA, but back then it was just American IPA. And those beers were really the beers that inspired me to be able to then create these home brews, and then eventually Blind Pig IPA, which was my first commercial IPA.
Are you by chance before the obsession with getting into brewing and all that, you come a creative background, engineer background? I get this engineer vibe from you, but you were probably so young you weren't.
Winemaking, because I grew up, around the winery. That was really it. Definitely more artistic.
Yeah.
But I've become certainly more technical over the years. Yeah. And, I had to sort of become an engineer when we built our Windsor facility, which is if any, of your listener viewers have been here, it's an 85,000 square foot, like very technical, high end. You said you're in Texas?
Yes, like Austin area. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, probably the most out there that what I've been to would be like Karbach.
Oh, right,
is very similar, very technically built, and all German equipment. And if any of your viewer listeners have been to a place like New Belgium or Sierra Nevada or Bell's or New Glarus, Stone, those are all breweries that have been built with this very technical focus, and ours is very much like that as well. But that stuff I've had to learn. And then, the things I don't know, we have consultants who help us, and we work our way through it.
I get a lot of people that get bit by that bug of fall in love with it. It's either they are able to express their creativity through recipe creating, right? Like where, hey, I really like this beer I got at the store, but man, it would benefit from a little more aroma and grapefruit notes or what, you know what I mean? Like I love that passion people like brewers have. And I imagine back then, because like you said, in when you started brewing, internet may have technically existed. It was not proliferated. The average guy did not have the internet. You didn't go on the forums like, I want to find people who brew. You had to actually go out of your way. And I imagine you're at you had a homebrew supply shop. I hear stories of Texas brewers. California was the forefront mecca of craft beer and homebrewing. Yeah. Texas, we were way far behind. So the people I hear who started brewing in the 90s in Texas were like, we went to the grocery store and we got malt extract and yeast, whatever they had, and we made beer. And I didn't really like it. Where I hear Californian homebrewers are like, I had a supply shop. The year was 92. They had what, you know what I mean? Like it seems.
They had packs of the smack packs of Y yeast were easily available. The second homebrew shop in San Diego County was Homebrew Mart. They went on to open Ballast Point Brewery. That was, so I shopped at that homebrew store as well when, once they opened. There was a place up in Orange County called Fun Fermentations that I would go to as well. Yeah, it was pretty easy to get homebrew supplies. Yeast, if you went dry yeast, it wasn't like it is today. It was in pretty rough shape. But the smack packs were available, and they did a quite good job. And Y yeast was a big part of those early years, especially until White Labs came around and they were selling pitchable quantities, and you didn't have to make a little starter. And I was Chris White's third customer on the commercial front. Pizza Port being the first, Home Brew Mart being the second, and then Blind Pig was the third. And I would call Chris, and he was at the time, White Labs didn't even exist. He was going to school, getting his degree in whatever it was in, but it wasn't, making yeast wasn't on his, on his mind yet.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until he finished school, and he was selling yeast to the three of us, but I would call him and order the yeast for Blind Pig. This is in 1994. And he'd be like, okay, well, come, I'll have it in a week or whatever. And I would drive from Temecula to La Jolla, where UCSD is, where he was going to school. And I would call him from the mobile gas station at the corner down the hill and say, okay, I'm going to be up the hill in, 2 minutes. All right, cool. I'll come down out of the lab. And he would bring a brown bag that had the yeast in it. And then I was driving my old 2-wheel drive Toyota, and I was super busy and he was busy. So I'd hand him a wad of cash, and he'd hand me the brown bag through the window, and I'd stuff it in my ice chest.
Yeah.
And then he'd put the cash in his pocket, and then off he would go back to, doing whatever he was doing for school. And I'd drive back to Temecula, and it probably looked really funny from afar.
Yeah.
But,
just an average California drug deal, whatever.
But yeah, I mean, so as a brewer in 1994, I was able to get, the California ale yeast from Chris, and was using it. So that was pretty cool. We had really good access. And hops, you would just pick up the phone and call Hop Union. We certainly weren't going up and doing hop selection at the time, but the quality was good. And then eventually, after I had sold my part in Blind Pig, and Natalie and I at that point had been married, and we moved to Sonoma County, and Russian River Brewery was opening. And I got hired to run the brewery. I met a gentleman by the name of Gerard Lemons, who was a sales rep for this small upstart 3-farm owned hop broker named Yakima Chief. And that was in 1997 that I met Gerard. And not only do I start buying hops from him, and I'm still buying hops from Hop Union as well, but he starts bringing me experimental hops, YCR 005, YCR 001, YCR 014. That turned into Simcoe. So that became a very important hop for these 3 farms, and saved them, literally save these 3 farms from going out of business. I did a great craft beer and brewing podcast last fall, so September of 2025, on the Peralt farm with Jason Peralt, and Jamie was interviewing us, and we told the whole story of Simcoe from start to finish. And there's parts of it that are quite moving, where Jason talks about his dad almost losing the farm because the hop business was in such a bad spot. But anyways, hops have been kind of layered into my home brewing and brewing career my whole life.
Yeah, of course. And I think what my listeners for sure will get out of this too, I don't think a lot of people understand, or maybe even don't appreciate, the history and legacy of some of these brands that we take maybe for granted. Because Y Yeast, I see Y Yeast things, and all the hop companies or whatever, where we're just like, man, these guys they're almost day one OGs, right? Like they're like, and the fact that they're still kicking, the background I have in the industry, I know how rough a spot it's in. And we can talk later about, briefly touch on the state of craft beer in general. We're in a weird time right now for the industry. And, I know it ebbs and flows, but like homebrew, I feel like every other week, some new local shops shutting down, and, it's a bummer, but if people, I guess where I'm going with this is support your local shops, guys. Go to
Yeah.
them and support your local
Yeah.
shops. Otherwise, you don't have a local shop. Today's show is brought to you by hopsdirect.com. Grown in the esteemed Yakima Valley on the Pewterball family farm, hopsdirect.com offers the widest variety of hops available online at incredibly competitive pricing. It's simple. They grow hops, they sell hops, and they ship hops straight from their family-owned farm to your doorstep. Producing the highest quality hops is hopsdirect.com's passion, and they're proud to be an independent grower in the craft beer industry. Go to hopsdirect.com right now and get what you need to make your brew day better. That's hopsdirect.com.
Well, that was one of the fun things that I remember about the early days in homebrewing is because there was no internet, so you didn't have any of these larger homebrew shop companies that, could ship across the country. You had to go to the homebrew shop, and you would go there and you would tinker around and you look at all the different ingredients, and maybe there were some home winemaking ingredients there too, which I understood because I made wine as a kid. But you would ask the owner or clerk or whoever, well, what's this for? What's Irish moss? Or, what's, whatever, like isinglass. What, you can fine your beer with fish bladder? That sounds disgusting. But those were like really cool times that you would spend, and you would look through the hops, and a lot of the specialty grain, well, all the grain were in like bins, so you could open them up and taste them, almost like going through the fruit or vegetable aisle. You pop it, a grape or something, whatever it is, and and you would explore these different hop varieties that they didn't really know anything about, and there weren't a lot of books on them. So that is completely different nowadays, and kind of reminds me as the little, as in those days, there was no streaming, of course, so you had to go to the video store to rent.
Dude, that's my
DVDs or VHS.
That's my old man yelling at the cloud, where my wife and I lament not having a Blockbuster anymore, or we had Hollywood Video or the video store, whatever. I tell my kids, like my wife and I, we got married very young because I had to get her to marry me very young. Otherwise, she wouldn't get to marry me if that frontal lobe had developed. So we're 20 and 21, and like our date nights would be going to Blockbuster, spending 2 hours looking at the 99-cent rentals and arguing, or maybe somebody there's like, oh, that's a good movie. Oh, really? Get their input. It was this whole communal type thing that I romanticize probably now, but I think it's still the way I remember it, where it's like, God, I kill for that. Where now we have the Roku or Netflix or whatever, and it's just like, we're still doom scrolling. No, not that. But we're on our couch. Like, it's so...
Well, that's how the homebrew shops were. You'd spend an hour or two in there looking, and you get ideas for recipes from the owner or the manager or clerk, whoever was there, who was really into home brewing. And obviously that's much different now.
A little bit, but I say this almost every episode, and I still believe it. We are still living in the best time ever to be a home brewer in regards to availability of ingredients, quality of ingredients. Like I'm digressing a little, and I'll try to rein myself in. I think, talking about romanticizing, I think people romanticize ancient beer as being like something other than just fermented gobbledygook, because I'm like, the quality of their malt could not have been that great. The quality of their fermentation, for the most part, may not have been that great. Like, it was just spontaneous or whatever, and they were drinking it and getting sloshed. But then come maybe a couple hundred years ago is when we started dialing stuff in, like, oh, temperature makes a difference. And the hygienic qualities of metals and whatever, you know what I mean? Like,
whatever it is.
When we started perfecting that, that's when I think beer got good. But either way, I wanted to ask you, early on in home brewing, was it the standard for 5-gallon batches, or was it all over the place based off of the ingredients you could get, that you could acquire?
Always 5 gallons and never more.
Yeah.
Never more.
Always
5 gallons.
And you were bottling back then, right? So, I mean, where did 5 gallons come from?
It was probably already the size of a bucket or something, okay. I'm guessing. But I do not know the name of that question. But some of my oldest homebrew books still are in 5-gallon batches, and extract was that way, and then you would do your all grain that way, and but yeah, it was always 5 gallons,
I
no
always want,
matter what,
yeah,
and
it, that's,
and we started, as I said, I started homebrewing with extract, but then went to all grain pretty quickly, and bottled for the first probably year, and then discovered Cornelius kegs, and learned that those are your friends. Otherwise, we'd be collecting bottles, champagne
yeah,
bottles, and
yeah.
I worked at a hotel, and I lived in San Diego, so I would collect all the champagne bottles from like the Sunday brunch, and we would scrape the labels off and then bottle into those, and then of course save the whatever beer we were drinking as well. But we like the champagne bottles for their volume size and half the legwork on it, because of they're twice the size of a beer bottle.
Yeah. As someone, I mean, I've been in the home brewing industry for almost 18 years, and I've only bottled one batch. I've always been just like it. And that's, to me, that's where the 5 gallons made sense. And I was like, oh, yeah, because that's what the corny keg is. It's five and some change. That made sense. But then I've never gotten an answer. Like, why, even before the proliferation of ball lock kegs or pin lock kegs, it was still 5 gallon batches.
Yeah. And I think there's one family of beers that benefit from bottles instead of draft, and that's Belgian beers that you want to bottle condition. You can go higher in carbonation with the bottle conditioned beer. That natural fermentation really aids in better foam, and I think it just adds to the creamy mouthfeel and whatnot. So we still, all of our Belgian inspired beers we make at Russian River, those all are 100% bottle conditioned, and we still go to that effort at the volume that it could be 75 or 150 barrels, and we would bottle condition those beers in whatever bottle we go into,
Right.
as well as all of our sour and wild beers. All of those beer bottles are 100% bottle conditioned as well.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But just because it is more beneficial to the end product.
We like the flavor profile better. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Doing it the way to get the result you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you from the transition from home brewer to commercial brewer, what were some of the challenges? Like, I mean, at surface level, I can think of scaling recipes might be a challenge. Different kind of equipment. You're not on a stovetop or whatever, or a turkey burner. What were some of the challenges that you had to overcome, and how did you navigate that as a home brewer getting into commercial brewing?
Yeah, I had only brewed one commercial batch of beer when I went professional. By that point, there was another brewery in San Diego who I became friends with the owner. So I think I brewed with him once or twice. And then I brewed with a guy from Bisbee, Arizona named Electric Dave, and he had a brewery there. And eventually I bought that equipment. That brewery closed. That's a whole nother story that you can find on the internet. I've told it many times. But anyways, so that equipment was all cobbled together. So that my first professional brewing equipment that I owned and that I actually brewed on myself was virtually just glorified homebrew equipment. The kettle was an old soup kettle from a military base. The mash lauter tun was something that Dave had built himself. It was single wall. There was no lid on it. It was on a swivel, and it was a 7-barrel system. So it would hold like 500 pounds of grain, and you would like tip it down and the grain would come pouring out into the trash can. And you try to do it slow enough that you get the first one into the trash can. And after that, you would just, rake it out. The fermenters were plastic. We had these big food grade poly fertilizer tanks that we turned into fermenters that Dave had had used initially, and then we figured out where to buy them. In the old days of craft microbrewing, there was these English tanks called Grundy tanks. They're English tanks, and we had every type of Grundy tank possible, and inevitably they all leaked to some degree CO2. So the challenge there was just actually making it work functionally. Scaling recipe, I didn't have the first clue how to do it. And this story I've told many times, I'll tell it again. Vince and Gina Marsaglia are the brother and sister team who own Pizza Port in San Diego County, and great people, longtime friends of ours. And I knew them just by going there as a customer to their first location and only location at the time in Solana Beach, which is a coastal town and little surf town in San Diego. And I called Vince and I said, hey, can you help me scale the recipe? I have my homebrew recipe for my IPA, but I need to scale it up. And he goes, well, better yet, why don't I just send you my recipe for Swami's, and then you can use it as a guide, as guide rails. And he knew, we knew each other well enough that I wasn't going to steal his recipe. And so he literally gave me his recipe, and then I used it as a guardrail to scale up my recipe. And I learned very early on how to scale a recipe, and I still feel like I can do a really good job of scaling a recipe from a homebrew size up to, in the old days, we'd go homebrew to 20 barrels. Now we have a 5-barrel pilot brewery, so we really don't brew on although we have a homebrew system here. It never hardly ever gets used. I have a 5-barrel system that I brew about 42 times a year in myself. I run it myself. So 5 barrels is, I think, 186 gallons. And then that we would scale up to our Santa Rosa brewery, which is 20 barrels. And then from there, we can scale up to our big brew house, which is 75 barrels. That's 31 gallons per barrel. So our big brew house is at 75 barrels. That's about 2,500 gallons. That's 2,325 gallons total. So 2,325 gallons. So pretty significant volume there.
Yeah.
But early on, it was very frightening to scale a recipe and not knowing if it was going to turn out, and knowing that we didn't have any money and that we really did need to sell the first batch of beer, which ultimately ended up being the first double IPA that is recognized commercially in modern era brewing. So, but those were just a couple of the things that getting people to drink beer that was this hoppy and this flavorful. That was a huge access to market. You'd go into a bar or restaurant, they'd have 4 draft lines, and all of them were industrial lager, Bud, Coors, Miller. Maybe one of those was a light beer. If they had a flavorful beer, it was probably an import from England, maybe like Bass or Watney's Red Barrel, I think was one, and maybe a Newcastle Nut Brown Ale. Like you see Guinness everywhere now. You never saw Guinness on draft back in the day. You'd go to an Irish pub, that's where you drain Guinness.
Yeah.
You wouldn't ever see it anywhere. And if you went to a really focused bar restaurant that was into good beer, air quote, they'd maybe have Sam Adams Boston Lager, maybe Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, or if you're in San Francisco, Anchor Steam was available on every corner. Fritz did a really good job of canvassing San Francisco, and then finding Liberty Ale was like a holy grail moment on tap.
Yeah, Anchor Steam might be the first California craft I had when I was 20 or 21 years old, where I was just like, oh my gosh, and I've tried to brew it many a times. I feel like I can nail that style down, California commonish, but it's a fickle style. I was kind of chuckling when you're talking about, like, so obviously the macro lagers and all that, people have their issues with them, but I just laugh because I go into a pizza joint in Austin, maybe not one that brews their own like Pine House, but like a chain one where they advertise, we've got 40 taps, come have beer. And now in 2026, let's say it's 40, 36 of them are IPAs. And then, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of a weird.
You'd be lucky to find industrial lager at a place like that.
That's what I mean. It's just funny how
now you have so many small breweries making American lager, whether it's with rice or corn, Mexican with corn or whatever. Like they can do a really good job of making that style, and and then you have all these other sub brands out there that are competing with the big industrial breweries that are brewed at contract breweries or whatever, but still, like, no matter what you want to drink, it's available out there.
It is, and maybe we could go into it a little here in a little bit, but I did want to say, though, people don't probably know this. A lot of people, if your beer's not available in their area, y'all also brew an award-winning pills. Like y'all, I think y'all just didn't your pills win gold at World Beer Cup 2 years ago?
Last year it
Last
did,
year.
yeah. We're just about up to the next World Beer Cup. In fact, when we're done, I'm going to go down and start labeling some bottles and cans that are available. We have to ship them next week. But yeah, STS Pils.
Yes.
We call it a Keller style Pils, but it's technically an Italian style Pilsner, which would be a German Pilsner, hopped at a somewhat high level, like German Pilsners are, at least especially compared to Czech Pils, but also dry hopped a little bit. Ours STS is dry hopped at a 1/4 pound per barrel, so very pedestrian level of dry hop at 42 degrees Fahrenheit, so a cold dry hop, so we don't get a ton of extraction from it. But the signature of an Italian style Pilsner is that it's still using all European cultivars. And so that could be American grown European cultivars. It could be true German, hops, lager hops, or in our case, we focus on a French hop called Aramis. And Aramis is a daughter to Strusselspalt, another French-German hop. And I just love the grassiness and the dryness and the crispness that Aramis gives. And it's a different hop. It's not one that everybody uses. And then the other portion of hops, a smaller portion, is actually Oregon-grown Mittelfrüh, Hallertau Mittelfrüh, although you wouldn't call it Hallertau because it's not from Hallertau. Oregon Mittelfrüh, as we call it, or U.S. Mittelfrüh, from a small multi-generation family farm in Oregon called Goshi, and Goshi, Gail Goshi is just an amazing hop grower, and I bet if you went to Hops Direct, which sells to homebrewers and have for decades. I used to buy from them. If they had U.S. Mittelfrüh,
they do.
That would be the stuff that Gale grows.
No kidding.
They've even pelleted for me in the past. But yeah, that's the STS is actually our third top selling beer. So we also make a Helles called Velvet Glow, and combined those two beers represent 15% of our volume production. So Pliny being number one is a double IPA. Blind Pig is a standard single IPA, is our second top selling beer. And then STS is number 3. And then 4 and 5 are kind of tied. That's it would be Happy Hops, which is another IPA we do, but it's more of kind of a progressive modern IPA that's using more tropical type hops. But it's clear, it's not hazy. So it's got all that juiciness of a hazy, but it's a clear, dry West Coast style beer. We make a hazy, but it's never been a huge part of our overall brand portfolio. Maybe it's our 6th or 7th top selling beer, probably 6th. But yeah, and then our 5th top selling beer is Velvet Glow, our Helles. So 2 of our top 5 beers are lagers, the other 3 being IPAs. Belgians used to be a big part of that. They've slipped off, but we still have a huge commitment to Belgian inspired and Belgian beers. I absolutely love them. They're still my favorite style of beer. We do a strong golden ale called Damnation that is 7.5% alcohol. And very much inspired by Duvel, one of my absolute favorite beers of the world. And we've been making that since 1999, which is the same year we started making Pliny.
No way.
It's been in our portfolio all this time. And there was a time back in the 2000 and probably 8 to 2016, the Damnation was our number 2 selling beer behind Pliny. So we even sold more than Blind Pig.
And it medaled last year as well.
And it's won, it's won some stuff along the way. Yeah. And, the medals, I'm not sure how much they mean anymore because, in the early days, that's all you had to promote yourself as a small upstart brewery.
Right.
But now with social media, it's really easy to build. I mean, certainly they help. I'm not putting them down.
Yeah.
But it's a lot easier now to create a marketing program for not just beer. It could be any small business, whether it's chocolate or whatever widget you make or sell.
Yeah.
And social media is an incredible tool for small business when it comes to marketing, and it's something you can do yourself.
Yeah.
We didn't hire someone to help Natalie do marketing until about a year and a half ago.
Oh, wow.
And
It was all
up until then, it was all Natalie doing it. And even now, she does a lot of it still herself because it carries our message and who we are and whatnot. But that's the beauty of small business now is how much, as much crap as social media is. And I'm not on social media, but our business certainly is. There is a good side of it for small business.
Yeah. What's even easier, Vinny, is I have it in with the trophy company, and I just make my own awards, and I just line my office. I'm Brewer of the Galaxy every year, man. That's the best. And then I go to social media because I'm on social media because I'm addicted to my social. But I like that you did the great segue where I didn't even have to do it, like covering your flagship beers and all that. And I brought up the pills just because people think of Russian River, like, the wild ales, these IPAs and all that. But no, you're brewing, like you said, your favorite style is Belgian, and you're brewing award-winning Belgians, and you're doing the award-winning pills. But the title of this episode, which I didn't say at the top for you because I'm doing post-production editing now, is The Godfather of Double IPA. I want to talk about, first off, you're a modest guy. Every interview I watch, you're very humble and modest. But on paper, my friend, in this industry, everyone recognizes you as you invented the double IPA. You did. How did that come about? And were you setting out to make a style your own, or was it just brewing the beer you wanted to drink?
Yeah, it started out brewing the beer I wanted to drink, and that was West Coast IPA, which eventually, when I then started Blind Pig, so I'd never homebrewed a double IPA, or maybe we did, but we didn't intentionally or understand it. But in 1994, when I started Blind Pig, I took my IPA recipe, which was a homebrew recipe that I extrapolated up using the help from Vince Marsaglia at Pizza Port. And then I wanted to make a bigger version of it so that I could test the equipment. My hopes were that I wouldn't have to dump the first batch because we were on a shoestring budget. So I took the malt and took it up by maybe, I don't know, whatever, 25% or 50%. I don't remember what it was. But it was doubling the hop load. That was the most important thing, based on the idea that hops are antimicrobial. If the equipment wasn't quite sanitized properly or whatever, because we were CIP in tanks, and we were using caustic to clean tanks and iodine, and eventually I learned about peracetic acid, and we were using all those things back then. So we were very strict on cleaning, but still, it was like, I've never brewed a commercial batch of beer on my own. And so that was the idea, was to use a whole bunch more hops. And in the end, I ended up creating this beer called Double IPA. And somewhere in my office here, I have a bottle of the inaugural ale, is what it was called. And we, doubled the hops, blah, blah, blah. And I told the story on the back, and I did call it a double IPA. I never used the word imperial. That someone else invented that or used that term. But I did call it double IPA. And then our next couple anniversaries, we did that. And then eventually I left. And then in 1997, Stone Brewing opens, and their first anniversary beer was Stone IPA, but their second anniversary beer was a double IPA. And Greg tells the story of being a customer at Blind Pig, and so he calls and asks if he can tell the story on the back label and use the word double IPA or whatever it was. I don't remember the specifics, but anyways, long story short, that it started as just a way to test the equipment at Blind Pig. And then fast forward, Natalie and I moved to Sonoma County, Corbel Champagne Cellars, which is the largest sparkling wine producer in America. You can find their sparkling wine champagne everywhere. They make 1 million, 2 million cases a year. They're starting a brewery, and I connect with them. They hire me. I run Russian River Brewery for them for 6 years, but a couple years in, get a call from one of our accounts, this place in the East Bay, around Oakland area, in the town called Hayward, called the Bistro. And Vic and Cynthia are doing an IPA and then a double IPA festival. And so he asked if I'd make a double IPA, and because he knew this history and my story with the double IPA, but it hadn't been memorialized yet by any beer writers. I think it wasn't until about 2004 that Stan Hieronymus wrote the story about double IPA, and he gave me credit for it, and he did the research and so on and so forth. So thank you, Stan. Love you, buddy. And so that's where Pliny came alive and was born in 1999, with Vic reaching out, telling me he's going to do this festival. Would I make a double IPA again, new recipe? And I'd been brewing with this experimental hop, YCR 014 from Gerard Lemons from Yakima Chief, that eventually turned into Simcoe. And it just seemed like the perfect hop to lay in. And so still to this day, the main hop in Pliny is Simcoe, followed by Amarillo, which came out shortly after Simcoe or about the same time. And then the name was something Natalie and I were just sitting around drinking beer one night and trying to come up with a name for this beer. And we wanted it to be something like big, like okay, well, Mammoth. Well, there's already a Mammoth brewery, so that doesn't work. And then we were thinking of like large format wine bottles, like are named after like Greek gods, like Methuselah and Nebuchadnezzar, that sort of thing. We're like, oh, those are cool, but yeah. And then we started looking in this Brewers publication, which was the Brewers Association's it's their publishing arm, and they had an old beer dictionary, and we looked up hops, and hops referenced Lupus salicarius, which is the original botanical name, and it talked about Pliny the Elder, who is this Roman naturalist who writes about hops, and then that referenced Humulus lupulus, which is the current botanical name, and we're like, Pliny the Elder, and it is truly Pliny, but somehow it became Pliny. And so we say Pliny is the person, Pliny is the beer. But that was like, that's the name. We're going to name a beer. And we had this vision that maybe the name would be larger than life someday, like that it would, of course you dream of these things. And that was the story of it. And so we would brew it as a seasonal, and then roll forward to 2003. Corbell's decides to get out of the beer business. I trade my severance package for the Russian River name and a handful of beer names, including Damnation, Redemption, so our two Belgian beers, and most importantly, Pliny the Elder. And we got 30 friends and family to invest in Russian River, let's call it part 2. And Natalie and I opened the pub in Santa Rosa, of what most people think of Russian River as, and with a 20-barrel use system that I bought from a defunct brewery in North Carolina. These, friends and family invested in us, and we opened a beer and pizza spot, and it's still, going strong. And we've grew into another production brewery, which we closed to open the big brewery here. And along the way, we bought out all 30 of those investors. And it's just Natalie and I that own the business. We're 100% independently owned. We don't have any, private equity or whatever, venture capital money, or no multinational or international breweries behind us. We're just a kind of a mom and pop brewery that have really just focused on quality and taking care of the customers, and really building our business through community.
Yeah, mom and pop. That's the best way to describe it. People don't realize, too, how hard it is to be independent at that level you're brewing at, much less the state of the industry. But in the early days of Russian River 2.0, when you do something like Pliny, was the initial reception what determined it to be a flagship beer? Or is that a determination you kind of made, not like forcing it on consumer, but I mean, were people so receptive to it that you're like, this is it? This is what we're doing?
It was, when we left Corbell, and I'll add, if you went to Corbell today, all 4 beers on tap in their deli are still Russian River Brewing Company beers. So we still have like this super tight connection. And in fact, I was just texting Gary Heck, the owner's son, who's now taken over the business last night, because he was here at the brewery with some friends drinking and eating. So we still have this great relationship with him, which is amazing. But no, when we took over and we reopened the Russian River in 2004 in downtown Santa Rosa, it was like a do-over. And it's like, okay, we're going to focus on the things. At Russian River out at Corbel. We had a golden ale, a pale ale. When we opened, we didn't have an IPA, but I added one in like a year in, and then a porter. We still make the porter, and that's really the only things left of the original. But it was a do-over, so it's like, okay, we're going to do Belgian beers. We started making sour barrel-aged beers in 1999 while we were at Corbel. We had one. It's called Temptation. We still make it. It's a blonde, lightly soured beer. Anyways, so it was like, okay, we want to have Belgian beers. We want to have some sour beers. Lagers weren't a part of the equation yet, but we really want to focus on IPA. We're going to make Pliny the Elder a year-round beer. Back then, breweries put beers on that they wanted to drink. And I think one thing that when you talk about the IPA story in the grand context of craft brewing, it got popular because it's what brewers wanted to drink. And brewers then had it on tap. And then customers eventually gravitated to it, hazy IPA, when you tell the story of all those breweries of the, in New England and the Vermont area, farther north, east, like those breweries had them on because that's what they wanted to drink. And so whether you're talking about hazy IPA or West Coast IPA, it doesn't matter. They were on tap because that's what the brewers were drinking. And eventually the customer got behind it. There wasn't anything more to it than that, or at least that's my opinion. So we just had it on, and, we were able to eventually get the Blind Pig trademark back because the brewery eventually closed. So we had Blind Pig IPA, we had Russian River IPA, and Pliny the Elder. And then it wasn't until 2010, and we started making Pliny the Younger, or triple IPA, in 2005, February 2005. But it wasn't until 2010 that Younger exploded. And Pliny the Elder didn't really get crazy like following until 2009, 2008, 9, 10, something like that. It was just kind of a slow burn to get there. And then eventually it just took, both Pliny the Elder and Younger, just kind of took, but it didn't happen overnight. And we could see that we were making more beer, and we still sold most of it out of the pub. Eventually in 2008, we started bottling it. So people started showing up and waiting in line for it. But it wasn't like this, like, wow, we have this beer that's got this cult following. It never registered to us like that.
That's funny, because I'll just say my perspective is from about 2008 to present day, where I think it was in its heyday of cult-like status. It was like, yeah, man, like people, my Californian counterparts would be like, you want me to ship you a bottle of that, and I'll trade you for whatever Austin area beer that they wanted. And I think the first time I had it on draft, and it was when it made sense to me, because I will be very transparent with you. I'm a boring drinker. I like alt beer and Kolsch and Pils.
Yeah,
I'm
nothing wrong with that.
Dude, I know. I'm plain a Jane boring guy, and I smoked so much cigars I burned my palate. I don't even know what I'm appreciating. But when I had Pliny on draft in maybe it was we were there for Homebrew Con, maybe 2012 is when San Diego. I know they're 2022 or whatever. They also had it there, but it was like 2012 or whenever, and have it on draft. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, this made sense. Like,
yeah, I think I might have even given the keynote at that homebrew.
I think you were the keynote speaker, and it was like 2012, wasn't it? Or 20, yeah. And but having it on draft, me like, oh, okay, like it made sense. It's still not my style of going to, in regards to like going out of my way for double IPAs, but that's when I do have it, and that's why I'm looking forward to brewing this recipe. Like having it on tap and enjoying it when I want is that's all I want as a home brewer, or as a brewer in general. I want what I want when I want it, and if I have all these kegs in my keezer, oh man, I'm in the mood for that right now. Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Cellar Science. For years, homebrewers have been told they have to choose. Do you want the quality of liquid yeast or the convenience of dry? Well, Cellar Science flipped the script. They're proving that dry yeast isn't just a backup plan anymore, it's the upgrade. Cellar Science offers premium dry yeast that delivers higher cell counts than typical liquid pitches, meaning you get a stronger, healthier fermentation without the hassle. And the best part? You can direct pitch right into your wort, no starters, no waiting, just brewing. Whether you need their new West Coast strain for a classic American IPA or jungle for a massive fruity estery flavor, they've got your next batch covered. It's quality yeast that doesn't break the bank. Save time, save money, and brew better beer with Cellar Science.
Well, I published the recipe back in 2005, I think it was. So about a year into the pub being opened in Santa Rosa. So when it was just Natalie and I and our investors, and it really was a nod to my homebrew roots. We were getting a lot of homebrewers emailing, asking for the recipe. So they'd heard about it, and it just seemed right. So we published it probably in Zymergy first, and then it kind of started getting out there. And the idea was that you wouldn't necessarily copy the recipe verbatim, because some of the hops you wouldn't even be able to get. Like as a homebrewer back then, you couldn't get Simcoe.
Right.
And it was bittered with Warrior, which we still use today. You absolutely couldn't get Warrior. Warrior was probably even harder to get than Simcoe. But both those hops weren't available. So like it was more of like guardrails for people to use to build their own double IPA. And the cornerstone of our IPAs had always been, and now most modern West Coast IPAs don't have any crystal malt in them. And back then they did have a fair amount of crystal malt. American IPA had crystal malt in it, but mine always had a low percentage, maybe, 2 or 3% of crystal 15 or at most crystal 40, and never beyond crystal 40. And, years ago, we've slowly shifted away from any crystal malt in any of our IPAs and have that very light colored, modern, crisp take on it. And that's what the recipe shows, with what we'll talk about here in a second.
Well, let me interrupt you super quick. I mean, if people are wondering and they hear the keyboard, it's because I'm erasing Crystal 45 from the recipe. Oh my God. Oh my God. We don't have Crystal.
That was a part of the original recipe, but the modern recipe there, it's not in there. But back then, even the small amount that was there was just there to give it a tiny amount of sweetness and body. And now we know that crystal malt aids in oxidation and whatnot, the melanoidin effect of the roasting. So it's best to not have it there. But yeah, that was it. And it really did help us by publishing that recipe. It really connected us more to the homebrew world. And then, different homebrew shops picked it up, whether it was Northern Brewer or More Beer along the way, and they created kits around it, which was great. And then, I'd go to homebrew conference and speak on double IPA, or the craft brewers conference would speak and do talks about it. And, and it's still like one of the most flattering things when I hear a professional brewer say, my IPA started out as as a clone Pliny recipe, which then morphed into what it is. And it's very flattering, humbling, and rewarding, at the same time.
I believe it. Yeah. I've been in, like I said, the industry almost 18 years. I'm waiting for flattering remarks. I'm waiting. It's going to happen. It'll happen at some point.
It'll happen.
Let's go over your recipe. And actually, so I'll tell you real quick, when the one that I come up with, taking stuff from like Homebrew Talk, BYO and all that. When I'm looking at your grain bill, I like the idea of yours better just because it does make it more simple. Like mine, it's two-row like yours. Yours is 94% two-row. But some of these, like I had 12 pounds of two-row, half a pound of Crystal 45, which we're taking out, a pound of Carapils, and then a pound of dextrose. Where do you think? I mean, yours is 94% two-row and 6% dextrose. Should I kill the Carapils as well?
Yeah, and that was the reason we used it initially, and that recipe sounds like one of the early versions of it, or somewhat early iterations. And the reason why was our brew house wasn't quite big enough to make like an 8% alcohol beer. So to get the body, we used the dextrin, because that was one of the main questions I would get from home brewers or professional brewers if they saw it, and be like, "Why are you adding dextrin malts, one fermentable sugars and sugar. It's kind of seems like a juxtaposition there, but it was because we needed body, and the sugar was just there to get the alcohol and volume basically of sugar, and that's why it was that way. But since then, we have become smarter brewers and better brewers at Russian River. So we really live by our mash temperature to get body and mouth feel. I call out 152, I believe. And is that
Yep.
is that what I have?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that's one thing that I'll go off on a little tangent on, is that we're big believers in liquor to grist ratio. And for viewers and listeners, whatever, that don't know this, what this is, it's basically the ratio of grain to water in your mash tun. And your mash temperature, we all know, the higher when you're doing a single infusion, the higher the temperature, the more unfermentables you create. The lower the temperature, say closer to 146, 148, whatever, somewhere in there, it's going to be, more fermentables, which is going to make it drier, so long as your yeast is healthy, blah, blah, blah. But liquor to grist ratio is another lever that you can pull, and it's a good tool in the toolbox. If you have a really thick mash, and assuming your water temperature and all is correct for whatever, a thicker mash will actually create more unfermentables, and a thinner mash, so more water in your mash tun, will create more fermentables, as long as your water isn't too hot when it's mixed with the grain, and you nuke the enzymes in the grain, and you nuke that natural enzymatic process that happens in the mash. All things being equal, and things are done right, a thinner mash will make a drier beer. And so we sometimes lean on that. And so that's one thing when you're looking at a recipe, be it commercial or homebrew, you need to take that with a grain of salt, as it's called in the, take an old saying, because you could have a really thick mash and then adjust your liquor to grist ratio, and that's going to affect your fermentability directly. Certainly mash temperature is the first thing that's going to affect body and mouthfeel, and fermentables, but this does have something to do with it. So, we put 152 because it's a good average number, but if someone brews this and they find that it's just too dry for what they like, they can bump the temperature up. But we tend to run at, and I don't know if we talk about this in the recipe, probably not, because this is a little deep into the weeds, but we tend to run at like 0.32 to 0.36 gallons of water per pound of grain. And so for like our lagers that we want to dry out, we'll go up to 0.4 gallons of water per pound of grain in the mash. And if we were trying to make a thicker, sweeter beer, say we were making a barley wine or something, we would maybe go lower to like, 0.25 or 0.28 or something gallons of water per pound of grain. And some brewers talk about liters per pound. Some will do it in, all metric. Some will be a combination. We just do gallons to pound, just because that's what we've always done. So anyways, so yeah, that's the grain build portion of it. Keep it really simple. If someone likes a little more malt backbone, they could also blend in like an English malt. I find Maris Otter or Golden Promise a little too malt forward, but there's this amazing, beautiful English malt that we keep around. It's a pale malt called Best Pale, and it's from Simpson, and it's my absolute favorite English malt. So Simpson Best Pale, we still use it in some of our recipes a little bit to add body and mouthfeel without adding this big malt note like Maris Otter does, but we want to carry this malt feel through without it being dextrin malt, a true unfermentable malt. This is still a regular, two-row style pale malt that works really well to blend into recipes. Maybe up to 20% you could replace if you wanted to add a little more fullness to a recipe.
Nice. And would you recommend mashing out with this recipe, or just doing no need to do
I don't think you need to.
Okay.
I think you can just go right to just literally call it a single spar or single infusion, and go, to a Vorloff and to a Sparge, and call it good.
I like it. Again, man,
Yeah, keep it simple.
if you haven't learned in the hour I've had you, I'm a simple man, Vinny.
Yeah.
It's not a shtick. It's a lifestyle.
Well, there's this thing that we focus on, and it's called TBI, and it's thermal load, and so you actually want to have your beer making process on the hot side as short of time in contact with heat as possible. If you can do your mash in 10 minutes, do your mash in 10 minutes and move right to your sparge and lauter. But TBI is the thiobar-Berturek index, and it's basically a fancy word for saying thermal stress. And it basically is heat stress that eventually can cause oxidative qualities in the beer. And so it's something we focus on. We're not talking about like oxidation. It's way more complex than that we don't want to go into. But in short, if you have the chance to do a 10-minute mash instead of a 30-minute mash because your grain is just really got high efficiency and it just converts quickly, do it. If you can move from a 90-minute boil to a 75-minute boil or a 90-minute boil to a 60-minute boil, do it. If you can, boil at a lower, temperature and basically have a less vigorous boil while still being above, say 212 to get DMS blow off, blah, 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 do it. Those things will aid in shelf stability in a big way. So
yeah, and at the end of the day, make better beer. Right. I mean,
and make better beer. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. And then,
and on the commercial level, we also want to do these things because it saves us money.
Yeah.
If you can move from a 75-minute to a 60-minute boil, think about 15 minutes. So it's labor, but it's also all the energy costs. Yeah. And so it saves us energy costs, but also just more sustainable as well.
Yeah. Time is money. Ingredients are money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Money is money. That's the thing. But now the real meat and potatoes of this kit and why I think we're pushing for a record. Normally the highest I've sold, that I've ever shipped out was like 52 kits. I mean, it's a humble, modest club. Yeah. But I think we're going to break that.
Amazing.
But no, my kids love working, man. They're good. They're going to bag the hops. They're going to stitch some soccer balls. Then we're going to go back to school. But the hops make this kit, dude. And I'm going to actually read your recipe because I'm changing up what I did. We're going to go with yours because it makes sense. We're trying to brew a clone. So 1.35 ounce of Warrior for 60. Everything online says to do your kit at a 90. Can you explain why we can get away with the 60?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I just talked about of what we've learned over the years, that we've just learned that we want, if we can shave the boil time down, less thermal stress, less heat on the wort is better. And so we were for years, it was a 90-minute boil. And then we were 75-minute for years. And then a few years ago, we moved everything to a 60-minute boil. And quality is even better now. So
I love it.
Nothing more, nothing less.
Perfect. No, and again, too, I not trying to be funny, but like things that make it more efficient. That's what I want. Yeah. I like I do all-in-one electric brewing because it made my brew day more efficient and straightforward. Yeah. I know I have friends, I have coworkers, people who brew on 3-vessel Herms, and they love it and they're dialed in. That's fine. That's more cleaning for me, man. I'm not janitorial. I'm not good at it. I like simple. So 1.35 ounce of Warrior for the full 60, and then a little under half an ounce of Amarillo for 15. And then at that same 15, 1.4 of Simcoe. What's that blend of Amarillo and Simcoe at the same time at 15 minutes left in the boil producing? Like, what are we getting out of that hop combination?
Yeah, it was, early on, Simcoe's always been the primary hop. Amarillo's the secondary number 2 hop. And so it was always kind of focusing on those hops with just a little more of that pine, grapefruit quality that you get from Simcoe and a little bit less of the stone fruit quality that you get from the Amarillo. So that's really, that's the art part of brewing, and you're that's the fun part of brewing, is that there is no right or wrong way to make a beer, make a recipe. You can just kind of pull it together, and that's what it ends up being. So
I love it. And here's the fun part. Well, pardon me. The dry hops to be the fun part, but the whirlpool is just a cascade of hops, pun intended. A little over an ounce of Cascade, 1 ounce of Simcoe, almost 3/4 ounce of Amarillo, and almost 3/4 ounce of Centennial. Again, is that also the art? Is that like this combination here gives us that?
Yeah, and it used to be that in the whirlpool, the Simcoe was the highest volume, but the reason why Cascade is technically a little bit higher here is that there used to be Cascade in the dry hop too, and we moved that to the whirlpool. So there is no Cascade in the dry hop, and that's because if you know what hop creep is, the secondary fermentation from the enzymes in the hops, we found that Cascade has a higher propensity for hop creep, and so we took it out of the dry hop and moved it to the whirlpool, and then that it just ended up being that way. So and then there's so Cascade, Simcoe, Amarillo, Centennial, all in the whirlpool before you get to the dry hop, which is a mix of concentrated pellets and regular T90s.
Yeah, and also though I want to mention it's so cool hearing like you didn't just make a recipe in the 90s and it's doing well and you leave it. You're perpetually trying to improve it for the sake of everything that's good about the beer, for efficiency and, like you said, money saving, and but more importantly for what works and gives the end result you're going for. Because like you said, that the combination here was not the same from the original Pliny you were packaging and distributing?
No. I mean, this is in the realm, but if you think about the original Pliny, like Citra didn't exist.
Right.
So yeah, that wasn't there. All these other hops that are in here were in Pliny pretty early on. I'm not sure Chinook, I don't think was in it in the early days, and nor was Crystal. But I can explain why those are in the dry hop once you run through that.
I was just saying, let's do that. So, 0.7 ounce of Amarillo, 0.35 of Amarillo, but T90 and
CGX is a concentrated Amarillo we use.
And
so
then
it's like Cryo, just from a brand name from Crosby hops.
And then 1/2 ounce of Citra, and another 1/2 ounce, but again that normal pellet versus that Cryo style
concentrated.
And then a little under 1 ounce of Crystal, a little over 1/4 ounce of Chinook, and 1.5 and some change of Simcoe. That is so much in the
and that's Simcoe Cryo. So
I see that. Oh yeah, it is.
That's like that would it's 1.55 ounces of Simcoe Cryo, but that would really be over 3 ounces of T90. Because you can always, anytime you hear of Cryo or CGX, any of these concentrated hops, just figure that they're concentrated, by double. So if you have a recipe like, here we have 1/2 ounce of Citra and 1/2 ounce of Cryo. If you just wanted to use straight Citra, turn that 1/2 ounce of Citra Cryo pellets into 1 ounce. So Cryo is always 50% of the T90 volume, T90 being the regular type hop. So same with Amarillo. If you don't want to, because you probably won't be able to find Cryo or CGX Amarillo. It'd be probably pretty hard to find.
Right.
Citra, you could probably get Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe. You can find those out in the homebrew world.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, reiterating what I said a little bit ago, that Simcoe was always the backbone of this recipe for its pine and light grapefruit quality. Amarillo for its stone fruit. We have very specific farms that we work with every year. We work with the same 3 farms every year to get our Simcoe picked typically in the exact same picking window. Same thing with Amarillo. We have 2 farms we work with there. We buy less Amarillo, so we don't need to buy we work with as many farms. And so that's where those hops are at. And then the other hops that are in this recipe, the Cascade, the Centennial, the Chinook, the Crystal, and of course Citra, Those are all there to give a citrus type note. As the whole world of beer IPA moved towards tropical, we really stayed focused on citrus, and that's just a flavor profile I like. We make a couple beers that have more of that modern tropical note, but Blind Pig IPA and Pliny both are very, pine, stone fruit, and citrus forward. And so, eventually we worked Citra in because it's a pretty easy way to get some nice citrus and complex hop qualities into the beer. And then we would always go for this kind of orange quality that I could get by blending Centennial and Chinook and Crystal hops, not the grain. And Crystal hops are a vastly underrated hop. It has this really beautiful, light kind of grapefruit citrus note to it. It's low alpha, so you can use a lot of it. It traditionally is considered a lager hop because it's bred through some lager, German hops, but it's got Cascade bred into it. So if you use it, in the right way and get the right farm, Oregon Crystal is absolutely amazing. You really end up with a really nice, citrus flavor. So all those things combined are why we use, like I said, Citra, Centennial, Cascade, Chinook, to get this citrus note. And then I'll just give a caveat there. We've since pulled from the recipe. Pliny doesn't have Cascade, or maybe it still has a little Cascade, but it doesn't have Centennial in it. It doesn't have Crystal, and it doesn't have Chinook in it anymore. And the reason for that is, I mentioned earlier this farm Siegel Ranch that Anchor used to buy all of their Cascade from for Liberty Ale, and they recently released a hop that we've been lucky enough to be at the front end with, and it's called Tangier. And and I just confirmed that Pliny now doesn't have Cascade in it, but we found that we can get this amazing orange aroma and flavor, like citrus orange, from Tangier, and we could replace the Cascade, the Centennial, the Crystal, and the Chinook. I know sometimes Chinook wouldn't be thought of as as citrus type, but we would get it from a farm that always contributed this nice citrus quality. So we were able to replace several of the hops with Tangier and get more of an impactful flavor. The reason why we're not including Tangier in this recipe is that as the home brewer, you're not going to be able to get it. I was mentioning to you before we started recording that we bought like 50% of the Tangier crop this year. I think from crop year 25, there was 50 or 60,000 pounds, and we bought like 20 or 25,000 pounds of it. And so we're using a lot of Tangier now, both in Pliny the Elder and Blind Pig. And then we have a West Coast Pills that we call Russian River 110 that is predominantly Tangier. So we're going to leave the recipe as it is and not include the Tangier, and then keep the recipe as it were, a couple years ago before we rolled Tangier into it, so that it does contribute that citrus note as an undertone. Citra is certainly still in it because it's such an easy way to get consistent, nice citrus and other hop quality, really nice hop forward, resiny notes. But even so, when you look at the overall hop bill, like Citra is just a small percentage. I think of it more as like if you cook with saffron, you would only use a little bit of it. A, it's super expensive, but B, like too much of it, and it would just overpower what you do.
And you can just say you want to rub our nose in it, like you can't get this. I'm fine with that. Yeah, when I put in the order, a longtime sponsor of the show, Hops Direct. Shout out Matt, he is the best. Our rep over there. And when I put in the order for 3 months at a time is what I typically do for like a quarter. I think he thought I was trying to run my own homebrew supply shop. When he, it's like a 80-pound box of hops for the 3 months kits, and he's like, "What?" Oh, no, he actually didn't question it at all. I gave him context, like, I swear I'm not going rogue. We're doing a Pliny clone. And he was like, "Oh my God, you're gonna do a Pliny clone?" I know. The 2026 this is the year of commercial clones for beer that have shaped the industry. And if we talked about double IPAs, well. Literally, people have been begging for a kit like this, so it's been years coming. We've been doing recipe kits since October of 2019, never done a double IPA, not a single one. And we do monthly kit. I've shipped out a kit every month since October of 2019. This is the first double IPA.
Oh, thank you.
No,
Thanks. Thank
you for your time, Vinnie. I had a blast. I think the recipes did go well. Worst case, I'm sending out what you're telling me, and I'm going to direct hate mail right to your inbox. So I mean, yeah. So you have a good screener, though. You don't always get it direct. That's good. You'll have software to screen.
Be fun for everyone who brews this to knock it out. I still love the old adage from Charlie Papazian's book: "Relax, don't worry, have a home brew."
Oh yeah.
At the end of the day, it's still just beer. It's not rocket science or
thank
whatever,
God,
brain surgery or anything. It's just meant to make you happy and be social and create sociability and something to drink on its own or with food or whatever. But it'll turn out great. And if you don't, if you add the hop in the wrong place, it's going to be okay. It'll still taste great.
Absolutely. And my friend, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great fun. Great chatting with you. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Likewise. Take care.